In this video, we're going to talk about how to allocate a common cost to multiple users by using the incremental cost allocation method. So let's say that you live in Chicago and you have a friend, Paul, in Paris who invites you to come visit him. And so he's actually quite wealthy and says, look, I'll pay for you to come visit me. And you say, oh, wow, it's $900. He's willing to pay for that? Yeah, I'd love to go to Paris. But then your friend Rachel, who lives in Rome, says, well, why don't you come visit me too? And you say, okay, well, let me look. And the round-trip flight to Rome is $1,100 from Chicago. But then you get a bright idea and you say, well, I'll tell you what, if I go from Chicago to Paris and then Paris to Rome and then from Rome back to Chicago, it actually saves some money. So it's $1,600, whereas if I purchased each of these tickets separately round trip and went Chicago to Paris and then Chicago to Rome, it'd be $2,000, right? The 900 plus the 1,100. So you're saving $400, but now the question is, your friends have generously offered, Paul and Rachel have offered to reimburse you for the cost of the flight, but the question is, how much do you bill Paul? And then how much do you bill Rachel, right? So the incremental method basically says that you assign somebody to be the primary user, right? So we'll call the primary user. So this ranking system is basically going to say, okay, Paul, for example, Paul would be the primary user because Paul, you decided to go visit Paul first, and then Rachel came along and said, okay, could you visit me too? So let's just say that you said, well, Paul's the primary user because I'm going to visit Paul no matter what, and then I'm only visiting Rachel because I'm visiting Paul. So if you assign Paul to be the primary user, and then Rachel would be called the first incremental user, right? So the first incremental user. And so it's going to work here's as follows. Basically, the primary user is going to get charged the full cost, right? So the primary user, you say, okay, how much would it cost to go visit Paul? Well, it's going to cost $900, right? It's going to cost $900 to go visit Paul. Now, let's return to our discounted fare, right? So it's $1,600 is what we're going to pay to do this cheaper version, right? Where we're not doing 2 round trips and we're saving $400. So now, and we just ignore that $1,100 that it would cost to do standalone for Rachel, and we say, what is the incremental cost of seeing Rachel as opposed to just seeing Paul by himself, right? So if we just see Paul by himself, it's $900, right? But by getting this big ticket where we go to multiple cities and stuff, it's $1,600. So then we say, okay, well, what's $1,600 minus the $900 to go see Paul? Well, that's $700. So the incremental cost, right? The incremental cost of seeing Rachel, given that we're already going to see Paul and pay $900 if we were just going to see Paul by himself, to do this trip would cost an extra $700, right? So this thing is incremental or extra, however you want to see it. It's an extra $700 to get the flight like this, to schedule the itinerary in this way to be able to see Rachel. Now, you might think, hey, that makes sense, but here's the question, and this can be difficult if you're a firm and you're trying to figure out who is the primary user, right? Because the primary user is going to get charged the full freight, right? They're going to end up paying. I mean, Paul is basically, it's as if you visited Paul by himself. So Paul's not getting any benefit of the fact that you got this discounted deal, right? The $400 that you saved, instead of paying $2,000 here, you paid $1,600. So that $400 in savings is being passed to Rachel, right? Because if you just went Chicago to Rome, it would cost $1,100 to see Rachel. But Rachel is only getting charged this incremental amount of $700. So you could see where if this was a firm, right, and we had 2 different divisions or something like that, where nobody wants to be the primary user, they want to be the incremental user and just get charged that incremental amount. But sometimes, I mean, what if these friends both emailed you the same day and you equally wanted to see them? Then it's like, well, who is the primary user and who's the incremental user, right? And that matters because that affects who is going to get the benefit of that discount. Who's going to be charged the reduced cost, right? In this case, it's Rachel, but it could have been the other way around, right? So let's say that the primary user, was Rachel, right? Oh, so if Rachel was the primary user, then Rachel would get charged the 1100, right? She'd get charged the 1100. But then when we say, well, how much gets charged to Paul? If Paul's incremental and our discounted rate is 1600, so then we say, okay, 1600 minus the 1100 that Rachel, right, is being charged, okay, and then that's going to be 500 extra. There's 500 incremental. So Paul is going to get allocated. Now this is, again, this is different. Now we're assuming Rachel is the primary user, right? So she gets charged that 1100 because you figure, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to visit Rachel no matter what. So if we do decide to do this extra thing where we change the ticket so that we also go see Paul, right, then it's going to be an extra $500. So now you see how in each case, of course, we're allocating $1,600 because that's the cost of the ticket. So that should be, if that doesn't add up, then you made a mistake. But you see that in the one case, Paul ends up getting allocated $900, and in the other case, he gets $500. He gets the $400 benefit, right? But in the other case, Rachel gets the $400 benefit. And so at a firm, there might be division managers fighting over who gets to, be the primary, or excuse me, the incremental user versus the primary user. And so there's one way to kind of get around that, and I'm going to talk about that in the next video.